Are fitness influencers really healthier than regular people? Like, just because you push extreme exercise or you look a certain way, like, does that mean you're healthier? And I want to look at the literature and I want to look at the data. As a fitness influencer myself, I really have to look in the mirror sometimes, is how hard I push my body or how much I might restrict things in my diet. Is it really healthier than just living a casually healthy lifestyle? So we're gonna look at the exercise, we're gonna look at the side of like vigorous exercise, strenuous activity, effects on the heart. We're gonna look at body fat, body composition. We're gonna look at performance enhancing drug use, all these things that go into making a fitness influencer to see if they really are healthier and how we can find that sweet spot. Because as people that consume this content, we need to understand that those can be very motivating pieces, and that is great to look at fitness influencers for motivation. But sometimes trying to live just like them is not what you want to do. So the first piece we need to look at is something that's called the Goldilocks Zone. So let's dive into that. After today's video, I put a link down below for 30% off your entire grocery order through Thrive Market. I also now have my own products through Thrive Market. I have my low carb nut butters that sweetened with allulose. So I have like a Nutella knockoff that's made with hazelnuts and chocolate and sweetened with allulose. So if you like the taste of like that chocolate hazelnut spread, you're gonna love this stuff. And again, you can use that 30% off discount link to get this stuff. I also have a macadamia nut dessert butter and a cinnamon Brazil nut butter, all linked down below. But whether or not you want to try that, Thrive Market allows you to get all your groceries delivered to your doorstep. And you can sort by different diet type, you can sort by allergies, by different categories, and it's all delivered in a couple of days, super easy peasy. So 30% off your whole grocery order, your whole cart, plus a $60 free gift when you use that special link that is down in the top line of the description underneath this video. I would really appreciate you trying them out because your support of them supports this channel and keeps us creating content. The Goldilocks Zone refers to exercise specifically. And there was a study that was published in Missouri Medicine that looked at the Goldilocks Zone. Because when you look at exercise intensity, it is a U-shaped curve. I guess more technically, it's like a reverse J-shaped curve. And what that means is that too little exercise, obviously very bad for mortality. Too much exercise was also very bad for mortality. So how do we find the sweet spot? Well, on the surface, this Goldilocks zone seems to be about 150 minutes or so of moderate exercise per week, or about 75 minutes of vigorous activity per week. Seems like when you go beyond that, it starts to change things a little bit. But the big thing, the big takeaway with the Goldilocks zone is that when you started to exceed like 4 hours of intense exercise, there started to be an increase in mortality risk. Now, there's a lot of things that we can factor in here, and we're not going to go into detail in this video because that's not the point of this video. There's recovery modalities, there's nutritional modalities, there's things that you can do to offset more of the extreme sides of things. But when you look at fitness influencers, and we all know the ones I'm talking about, I'm not going to point fingers, but some that push really extreme things, particularly when it comes down to the endurance side of things, and I'm kind of guilty of it too. That's where we have to be careful, like pushing heart-pounding exercise for prolonged periods of time for the essence of push it harder, no pain, no gain, it really could be detrimental. That being said, there's no upper limit based on the literature to like low to moderate, even generally moderate exercise, like leisurely exercise, going out and playing pickleball, whatever, going out and going for a little jog. There doesn't seem to be an upper limit to that. It's when it starts getting to this really high intensity stuff. But with this, we need to look at very interesting data when they actually monitored the Hadza tribes. They put heart rate monitors on hunter-gatherers because what they want to do is they want to say, what are they doing? What did we used to do, and what kind of level of intensity did we have for a culture or a tribe that seems to have really good metabolic health? So this was published in the American Journal of Human Biology, and they ultimately found that hunter-gatherers seemed to do a whole lot of low to moderate intensity activity. Okay, they were moving around a lot, looking in the average of like 16 to 20,000 steps per day on a low day, just chilling like that. Okay, but what they found when they put heart rate monitors on 2 different Hadza tribes is that the amount of moderate to vigorous activity they did was actually pretty high. Not extreme vigorous, but moderate to vigorous. On average, they were doing about 135 minutes per day. That's 14 times the American average. Okay, what was interesting is they had no increased risk of cardiovascular disease or no increased risk of mortality based upon how much activity they were doing. Okay, they also had great metabolic markers, and they were active well into their 70s, and they were doing pretty intense amounts of work. So what this starts to tell us is that for metabolically healthy people that are watching their diets and are kind of in control of their life, being able to push that moderate to vigorous intensity is entirely doable. So if you embody your practice and you really practice what you preach, you can push it there. But the problems, which we're going to talk about in a second, come into when we start pushing these go forever, kind of like you can go run 100 miles and be fine kind of thing all the time. There's a study published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology that divided people into sedentary, light exercise, moderate exercise, and vigorous exercise, or kind of extreme exercise over the course of a week, like how many minutes or hours per week. Long story short, to spare you a lot of details, they found that all groups of exercise, light, moderate, and vigorous, were better than being sedentary. Okay, so even if you say, you know what, I'm gonna take this video to the bank, I don't wanna do vigorous exercise, that's fine. Just don't be sedentary, because sedentary is worse than any of these categories. I know that sometimes we strike fear about the vigorous activity, but it's still better to do vigorous activity than it is to do no activity. However, there was a study published in the American College of Cardiology, took a look at runners. They found that runners that were just light runners, like joggers, they would run at a light intensity, they had the best outcome as far as mortality risk was concerned, followed by moderate, and then strenuous runners ended up having the lowest improvement or the least overall improvement when it came down to mortality risk. So those that pushed it harder with the running actually had a higher chance of dying than those that were just casual joggers, which is interesting because when you start getting into that category, again, you're talking about pushing it very hard. Now, before I put this whole section to bed and we move on to body fat, I want to talk about a big study that was published in JAMA. Took a look at 205,000 Australians. Okay, and they found that no matter what, any amount of vigorous activity seemed to be an improvement. Okay, now listen, here's what I mean. If you take two people and both people are doing the same amount of moderate physical activity, but one of them does even a little bit of vigorous or a lot of vigorous, they're still going to have a better outcome than the person that didn't do the vigorous. So the point is we need some vigorous activity. We need it. It is important if we want to live a long, healthy life, but the dose makes the poison. And some of these influencers really do push it. At least they appear to push it, and they might be pushing the wrong agenda for a lot of people. Now, the reason that this could be problematic a lot of times comes down to the heart. And I'm going to give you a quick mechanistic breakdown of like what happens there. You have a constant remodeling of the heart that happens when you're having high intensity and recovery, particularly in the right ventricle. So essentially what ends up happening is you get sort of this remodeling and potential fibrosis. Makes it harder for the heart to contract because you have fibrosis that's forming. And then you also end up getting left ventricle hypertrophy in the walls of the heart. So what happens here is the heart is a muscle. So when you're working really hard, so you start strengthening that heart so much that it gets strong, you put yourself at risk for arrhythmia and AFib. And this is why you start to see it's called the athlete's heart. Again, full disclaimer, that is a pretty extreme case, but if you were to train like a good majority of the fitness and sort of endurance influencers tell you to, that could happen. And that is a very real thing. The athlete's heart is a real condition. Okay, so then we have the body fat side of things. Now, I have to fall on the sword here. I am low body fat, but there is a difference between being low body fat and extreme body fat, where we're taking pictures trying to show every single vein in the abs all the time. And you've got a lot of people that are trying to stay so ridiculously lean year-round in bodybuilding, contest prep shape all the time for the sake of Instagram and showing an image. I don't think that that's healthy. Okay, if you look at the bodybuilding world in general, a lot of them will even admit that what they're doing is not exactly healthy. It's purely for a look. And I've been there, I totally get it. But when you look at the big picture, it's really difficult to find data on low body fat being bad, which is wild. So it doesn't mean that it isn't bad. Here's the problem that we face if you're an evidence-based person and you're looking at low body fat risks. Most of the literature out there compares lower body fat to high body fat. There's not enough people in the low body fat category to really get a good cohort of people. So most of the literature is just comparing people that are very high body fat to low body fat, in which the case is most of the time low body fat is going to be better than high body fat. So, but it doesn't take into consideration very low body fat compared to moderately low body fat. The only literature we have to look at that helps us with this is going to be BMI. And BMI is going to show us a U-shaped curve that low BMI is very, very bad when it comes down to mortality risk, as well as high BMI. But low BMI is probably looking at someone that's very frail, possibly anorexic, possibly dealing with a problem, right? High BMI is going to be someone that's obese. This does not factor in muscle. It does not factor in fat. So it makes the literature very hard to look at and extrapolate anything that I could say with absolute certainty based upon the evidence is going to be good, bad, or ugly. Now, by BMI standards, I am obese. By body fat standards, I'm very lean. Now, when you start getting into the categories, you start saying the desired body fat for optimal health seems to be for men around like 10 to 15% body fat. For women, maybe 18 to 25. When you start getting into the 8 to 10 body fat, you're in like kind of like a sweet spot of being able to be fitness and lean. When you start getting down to 5% or less, you can make a lot of arguments that that is detrimental. Okay, that staying at that level of body fat is going to be detrimental for hormone function. Remember, like you need to pull from your fat to build hormones. This is important. So that's why you see hormones crash, especially in women that get very, very lean, right? It's bad for the hormones. Okay. Also bad for the brain. It's bad for the overall myelination of our nerves. But one of the things that people overlook is that we have fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. If you don't have a place for those vitamins to go, you have to continually be bringing them in. And again, when you look at people that are trying to stay very, very lean, restrictive diets that aren't getting adequate nutrition in, it's hard to get those vitamins in the first place, let alone having a place to store them. So I can't tell you that being super lean is 100% going to be dangerous, but I can tell you from experience that if I am very lean, I get sick more, I have a harder time recovering, my hormones don't function as well, there's problems in the bedroom, it's noticeable. So being very, very, very lean all the time, although looks good on the surface, isn't always what you want to be. So I prefer to be in the ballpark of like 6, 7, 8, 9% than I do in the ballpark of 4, 5, or 6% body fat. And I can tell you that the means in which a lot of people use to get to that level of body fat is usually not really good, which brings me to another category, performance enhancing drugs. Now, full disclaimer, like I have no problem with people using testosterone replacement. I think it's actually quite beneficial. I think it's hugely beneficial and it's helped a lot of people. Candidly, I don't even have an issue with people using performance-enhancing drugs outside of TRT. Most people that I have known in the world of competitive sports or the world of bodybuilding, they actually are pretty responsible and they do it right. But that's the small minority of people that I know. There was a study published in the Journal of Internal Medicine, took a look at Danish people that were 545 of them using anabolic androgenic steroids, AAS, or 5,450 control, okay? There was a 3 times higher mortality risk in those using AAS than those that were not. Now, this could easily get picked apart because there's a lot of confounders. For example, people that are using steroids might be doing more extreme things. They're pushing their bodies in harder ways. They're pushing their nutrition in harder ways. They're just a different kind of person. They're less risk averse. They're willing to take risk and therefore their risk of mortality might be higher. So there's a lot of things there. But when you look at the other literature, there was a study published in Liver International, looked at 95 AAS users versus 85 non-AAS users, over a 12% increased risk of developing fatty liver disease. Again, does this mean that if you use them responsibly, and again, I know I could get like destroyed for even saying that, but if you use them responsibly, I don't know if this is going to be an issue. However, in the world of social media, when someone is trying to look a certain way, contest prep, all the time, huge muscles, super lean, year-round, constantly abusing trend and using all this different stuff, I don't think that's exactly healthy, right? You're probably going to run into an issue. There's also a study published in Circulation. There's going to be increased risk of cardiomyopathy, increased risk of myocardial infarction, a heart attack, conduction abnormalities where the heart actually just can't like send this proper signal. So it's gonna beat in a weird way. So to get to the extreme, to look a certain way, to be a fitness influencer, when you factor in a lot of these things, probably not the healthiest thing. And the dose makes the poison, and it's all about the minimum effective dose. And if there's one thing that I've learned over the last 10 years, 12 years of doing what I do, is that getting more extreme with things, although might get you a little more attention, the juice is usually not worth the squeeze. The stress you put on your body, the havoc that you wreak on your life, to squeeze a little bit more in the way of viewership, absolutely not worth it. I would much rather trade some of the extreme side of what I've done for some of the more modest approach that a lot of my viewers have, and finding that balance. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.